Well, guys, we finally made it. The conclusion to my first saga of my version of the MCU, the Secret Invasion saga. Now, without further ado, kicking off this video will be Black Panther, in which nothing would really change as this was a really good movie and Killmonger was a fantastic villain. If there was anything I would change, I'd cut out Winter Soldier since he's not in Civil War, so he would have no reason in being in Wakanda. And also, I would keep Claw alive by the end of the film. The next movie coming up will be Fantastic Four, Attack of the Skrulls, which would feature, as you would imagine, the Skrulls as the main antagonist. So the movie would open up with Reed in his laboratory, trying to identify some weird phenomenons that his scanner is picking up. And Sue would then later enter the laboratory and try and get Reed to stop working so hard and try and spend some time with her. Reed would answer in a bit of a dismissive way, which would kind of annoy Sue a bit before she would later surrender and just leave the laboratory, leaving Reed to his work. Ever since the Fantastic Four first escaped the negative zone and encountered Nick Fury, Reed Richards has been drawn to his laboratory and rarely leaving it ever since. Reed was aware of the Registration Act, and since the Fantastic Four aren't really that much of crime fighters, they're more of explorers in their own way, they didn't really have any problems with the act as a whole. Also, Reed would see the Registration Act as more of an Avengers type of situation. And Reed would also be aware of the Avengers and would see them as pretty decent folk. Reed would be working in his lab until his scanners pick up a signal that was trying to be transmitted. Until Reed, interested, would pick up on that signal and it would reveal to be a distress signal from beings far off into space, and they would request that Reed help them in saving their ship as they were caught in an asteroid field in which the ship was badly damaged and their own were still inside of the spaceship. Reed would be intrigued and would inform his family about this, and Sue would recommend that they tell Nick Fury, but Reed, being the man that he is, would see this as an opportunity for more scientific inquiries and didn't want S.H.I.E.L.D. getting in the way. And plus, Nick Fury has been off the grid for a while now. We of course know this because of the events of Winter Soldier. And so Reed and the other members of the Fantastic Four would take their spaceship and fly off, not before being waved goodbye by the robot friend known as Herbie, who was created by Reed Richards. And so while on the spaceship, Johnny would remark that this feels like deja vu and they might get an even weirder set of powers this time. Thing would then remark as well, which would lead into an argument between the pair. Sue would roll her eyes and Reed would be invested in trying to find the spacecraft in which harbored the distress signal, which they would find, in which Reed, Sue, and Thing would go inside the spacecraft while Johnny kept watch inside of their own spaceship. And Johnny would protest that he wants to be a part of the action too, but would quickly be silenced by his sister. And so the trio would enter the spacecraft and Thing would comment that he has a bad feeling about this. Sue would also share this sentiment, but Reed would just say that they're overreacting until suddenly a massive swarm of what appears to be green people would emerge from a door in the spaceship and proceed to attack the trio. The trio would try to defend themselves, being confused on what the hell is going on. And due to the sheer number of attackers, it is hard to see where the other members are. And so Reed would punch one green alien and would proceed to turn to Sue, in which he would ask her if she's alright. Sue would say she was, and Reed would turn around before being hit in the back of the head by what appears to be Sue. Reed would be confused on why Sue would attack him before it is then later revealed that the person was not Sue, but instead one of the green people who shapeshifted into Sue. The same occurrence would happen with Sue and Reed, and Thing and Sue. And so the Fantastic Four would then later be overwhelmed and knocked out and taken prisoner. The scene would shift to Johnny Storm, still in the Fantastic Four spaceship, and is getting a bit irritated with how long the team is taking. And so, even though that he knows his sister would probably be mad at him, he'll exit the Fantastic Four spaceship and proceeds to aboard the spaceship in which the distress signal was harbored in. And so, we would cut to Reed, Sue, and Ben, who are all incapacitated and can't use their powers. And we would hear footsteps approaching from the distance. And those footsteps would get closer and ultimately reveal the Skrull leader known as Klurt. Reed would ask who the hell was this guy and why did he send him a distress signal. Klurt would reveal that there was never any danger and that it was all a trap to lure Reed into their spaceship. Klurt would also reveal that they have been following Reed for a while, ever since he made his escape out of the negative zone, in which the Skrulls would find remarkable as Reed was the first recorded individual to ever manage to break free of the negative zone, along with his family. So this would interest the Skrulls enough to invest time studying Reed and his family, before ultimately deciding to make their first move onto capturing them, and intend to remove Reed's brain and place it onto Klurt. In that way, he would gain Reed's intelligence and manage to lead his army into a better future, and to avenge their Skrull queen by conquering Earth. Reed will tell Klurt to go to hell, and Klurt would nod at a nearby Skrull soldier who would pull a lever and thus would proceed to electrocute Reed. Sue would tell them to stop, and Klurt would laugh, seeing as how Reed was in no position to insult him. Klurt would leave the room, leaving the trio to their fate. We would see Human Torch maneuvering his way through the spaceship before overhearing from other Skrull soldiers about the recent capture of 3 individuals. Human Torch would realize immediately that those were Reed, Sue, and Ben, and thus would enact a certain montage of him sneaking around through the Skrull base undetected, trying to go unnoticed, which could play out as a bit of a comedy scene just to break the tension. Johnny would then ultimately stumble into the room that was holding the trio, and he would proceed to knock out the Skrull soldier that was controlling the lever. And Johnny would proceed and try to free his teammates before we would hear a clapping sound, which would reveal Klurt, who is sporting a grin, and would tell Johnny that he's been expecting him. And Klurt would inform him that he intends to use Reed as a means of improving the Skrull Empire. And Klurt would proceed to mock Johnny and basically insult him on how weak he is and how he stands no chance against him. Johnny, in response to this, would proceed to say, "At least I don't have a ball sack for a chin," which enrages Klurt, and he proceeds to battle the Human Torch. It is a hard fight, with Klurt gaining the upper hand. That is until Human Torch would light his eyes using his fire powers, which would serve as a distraction for Human Torch to free his teammates. And now, with the Fantastic Four fully free, they would combine their powers to defeat Klurt, knocking him out and escaping the Skrull ship, heading onto their spaceship and proceeding to flee, not before being chased by the Skrull ship. The scene would proceed to play out just like a scene from Star Wars, in which an enemy ship is firing lasers at the Fantastic Four ship. It is not until Klurt would appear out of the Skrull spaceship and proceed to fly in space towards the Fantastic Four spaceship using the Invisible Woman's force fields as well as Johnny's fire to propel himself towards the Fantastic Four ship, in which he would proceed to break inside and proceeds to battle the Fantastic Four. The team would be shocked at how this guy has their exact powers, before Clerk would reveal that he can not only have the ability to shapeshift, but can also replicate the powers of his opponents as well, stating that now the Fantastic Four has no chance now that he has their own powers to use against them, which would result in a massive climactic battle between the Fantastic Four and Clerk. No, the Super Skrull. A battle which ends in where the Fantastic Four uses their combined efforts in order to overwhelm the Super Skrull, which would eventually work and would lead to the Super Skrull overheating due to the amount of energy and powers he's receiving. Thus would cause an internal reaction, and thus would implode the Super Skrull from the inside. The Fantastic Four knows that the fighting isn't over, and would proceed to maneuver around to an asteroid field in an attempt to lose the Skrull spaceship. Due to the Skrull spaceship being too large, the asteroids managed to hit it and would destroy the Skrull spaceship. Reed would remark, well, now they got hit with an asteroid field. The Fantastic Four would return to Earth and would head back to the Baxter building before being greeted by none other than Tony Stark, who would compliment Reed on his intelligence, and Reed would wonder why Tony Stark was here of all places. Tony would reveal that ever since the Avengers have disassembled, the world's been needing new heroes in accordance to the laws of the Registration Act. Reed would tell him that he has no interest in the Registration Act or helping the Avengers, but Tony would insist and would proceed to give his number to Reed. Reed would hesitate before taking Tony's number. Tony would leave, telling Reed that if he ever needs him, he's just a call away. After Tony leaves, Thing would remark that he thought the building would collapse on themselves, due to the two men having egos big enough to destroy a galaxy. Reed would chuckle, and the movie would end on a pretty happy note. We would get a post-credit scene revealing another faction of the Skrull Empire, this time more determined than ever to conquer Earth, in which one of the Skrulls would unveil their new Super Skrulls, individuals who can not only shapeshift, but replicate the powers of their opponents, and it would feature an army of Skrulls before the screen would cut to black. The next movie in this phase will be Planet Hulk, which will be the third Hulk film in the series, featuring Hulk after his departure in Age of Ultron would crash land onto Sakaar, in which the movie would play out pretty similar to that 2010 animated movie. So this movie would pretty much be that version of that film, except in live action, with the Grandmaster replacing the Red King, as I just find the idea of the Grandmaster controlling some place as Sakaar as more accurate. And so the Grandmaster won't die by the end of the film, but would manage to retreat as a result of Hulk's rebellion, along with his legion of savages. Beta Ray Bill will also make an appearance in this film and would make a reference to Thor, which Hulk would immediately recognize. And so the movie would end with Hulk finally being at peace with himself and taking his place as the new ruler of Sakaar. The next project following will be The Punisher Season 1, which honestly stays the same. Captain Marvel is up next, and this movie will still take place in the 90s, as well as keeping the Skrulls as the main antagonist. So there won't be any plot twist with the Skrulls being good. They'll still be evil in this version. Carol will also have an actual personality in this movie, as I found her to be pretty bland in the original movie. So in this version, she'll actually express more emotions and basically have a character arc. As well as Nick Fury not losing his eye because of a space cat, but it was because of one of the Skrulls impersonating themselves as someone who Nick Fury trusts. But Nick Fury would let his guard down, and the Skrull impersonator would attack Nick Fury, leading into Nick Fury losing his eye. The next movie will be Yellowjacket, Quantumania, which will ultimately deal with the fallout of the events of Avengers Civil War. as well as being the third Ant-Man film in the Ant-Man trilogy. And this movie will be more of a psychological delve into Hank Pym's psyche, as this movie will make a note of how he's less patient than usual and will be prone to lashing out at people for petty things. This could be attributed to the fact that he had to throw his own wife in jail, but that would be hinted at throughout the entire movie. Tony Stark will also be in this movie as more of the angel on Hank's shoulder, and basically reassuring him that what he did was hard, but it was the right thing. And this would lead into Hank lashing out at Tony, which would lead into Hank flying away from the Avengers HQ. I'm also thinking of having the villain of this movie be Radioactive Man, who in this movie is pretty much a petty thief taking advantage of the Avengers' disassemblement and trying and steal as much Stark and Pym tech as he can, which would ultimately lead into a confrontation with Hank Pym, in which him and his Yellowjacket suit would proceed to battle Radioactive Man, in which Hank would manage to defeat by going down to subatomic level, risking his life in order to rearrange Radioactive Man's atoms from the inside, managing to nullify his radioactive capabilities and managing to beat him. The movie would end with Hank looking at himself through a mirror, and we would see a glimpse of a little green in the iris of Hank Pym's eyes before his face would slowly morph into that of a Skrulls. He would then use his intercom to contact the Skrulls' base of operations, in which the Skrull Hank Pym would inform that phase 1 of their plan is complete, and now they can proceed to finally conquer Earth. And now, the movie we've all been waiting for, the cultivation of all 3 phases, Marvel's Secret Invasion. The movie would open up with Tony Stark in Washington, D.C., having a meeting with the president. The two would discuss the ramifications of the Registration Act, and the president would ensure Tony Stark that what he's doing is the right thing, and that he should be proud that he's serving his country the right way. And Tony Stark would then leave, and we would zoom in on the president's face before it would reveal that his face would shift into that of a Skrulls. A member of Secret Service would walk in and would ask the president, was it wise to send a Skrull out in the street? The president would say he just wanted to test a theory. Also, dividing Earth's forces has worked beautifully due to them enforcing the Registration Act. And now all the building blocks are set in place, and which would allow them to finally fulfill their prophecy in conquering Earth. We would then cut to the raft, in which we would get a look inside of the prison and would see Team Captain America still locked inside due to the events of Civil War. And we would cut to Captain America in his cell until he would hear some strange noises going on outside before his cell door would later open and in would step in Nick Fury, who would quickly tell Cap that there is no time and they need to get out of here before reinforcements show up. Captain America would be confused and would initially decline, seeing as how he feels like he needs to be put in jail because of his actions during Civil War. And Nick Fury would tell Cap that this is bigger than the Registration Act and that something much more sinister is going on. Captain America would be confused and Nick Fury would tell him to trust him. And so with that, Steve would be breaking out of jail, along with the other members of Team Captain America, in which they would escape using a helicopter, piloted by Black Widow. We would cut to Tony in his private airplane, flying back from his meeting with the president, until a portal would open up, and outstep that portal would be Doctor Strange, who informs Tony that he needs to speak with him, and that he fears that the Earth might be in danger. Tony's initial response to this would be, About as what you would expect. But for Strange, who is in a hurry, would quickly inform Tony that this is important. Tony would hesitate before reluctantly agreeing, not before giving a sassy remark on how he wonders if there will be a talking lion on the other side of the portal. And so both Strange and Tony would step inside and the portal would close. And so we would cut to Nick Fury, Black Widow, and Team Cap still on the helicopter. Nick Fury would sit the team down and explain that he wasn't sure of it at first, but now he's certain of it. Captain America would ask what the hell he meant, and Nick Fury would basically retell them about the events of Captain Marvel and how a species of shape-shifting aliens once tried to conquer Earth, but was thwarted by Captain Marvel, and so the species left Earth, not before vowing to return, and which they did when Loki came to Earth and invaded with the army of the same species. And ever since then, that species became more bold in their attempts to attack Earth, in which Nick Fury would also retell the events of Dark Phoenix, in which Charles Xavier told him what happened about how an alien invader tried to absorb the powers of the Phoenix from Jean Grey, and the invader matched the description of what Nick Fury was thinking of. Janet would ask, who the hell were the invaders? And Nick Fury would say, the Skrulls. And Nick Fury thinks that they might have already gotten a foothold on Earth without any of them even knowing it. Nick Fury would reveal on how he was on a mission in which one of his comrades died, but when they died, they morphed into a Skrull, which left Nick Fury wondering who else could the Skrulls have impersonated. And so he spent the last couple months trying to piece together as much intel as he can before finally concluding that the Skrulls might have been the reason that the Registration Act was being held in the first place. Captain America would ask, so does that mean that someone in the government is secretly a Skrull? Nick Fury would say yes. After a while, Black Widow would land the helicopter on the front yard of the X-Mansion. Nick Fury, Black Widow, and Team Captain America are greeted by Charles Xavier and the X-Men, who are still shown to be a little depressed after the death of one of their own in Jean Grey. Steve would shake Scott's hand and would further thank him for him and his team's help during the Battle of Ultron in Sokovia. Scott would say, don't worry about it. Rogue would whisper to Storm on how hot Captain America is. Gambit would overhear this and would give a sort of a jealous look. Nick Fury would converse with Charles Xavier and inform them that now that he has the team, they can go over the plans on how to stop the Skrulls from their invasion. And so everyone would enter the X-Mansion to further discuss their plans. We would cut to Tony and Strange in the Sanctum Sanctorum, in which Wong would appear as well, and both of them would inform Tony about how they fear that the Earth may be overrun by a secret invasion of some sort, in which an alien species known as the Skrulls have already made their move. Tony would be confused on what the hell they meant, before Strange would give the same exposition that Fury gave to Team Cap, in which Tony would realize that there must be a Skrull agent working in the government. Tony would get a call on his phone, in which the caller would be General Ross, who informs Tony about Team Captain America breaking out of the raft. Tony would be shocked and would try to leave the Sanctum in order to stop Captain America. That is until they hear a loud crash outside, in which Tony, Strange, and Wong would go out to investigate to discover a super Skrull attacking the streets of New York. This would lead to Tony suiting up and Doctor Strange as well as Wong to fight the super Skrull in order for him to stop causing havoc. This would lead into Tony tackling the super Skrull underground, in which the battle would proceed to take place in the New York subway. Iron Man will try his best to prevent as many casualties as he can while also fighting the Super Skrull, as well as with Doctor Strange and Wong to assist. The fighting would head back to ground level, in which the Super Skrull will proceed to punch Iron Man, sending him flying into a building. The Super Skrull would throw a car at Iron Man's direction. That is until the car would be caught by a web, and Spider-Man would appear to crash the car onto the Super Skrull. This would daze the Skrull long enough for Doctor Strange and Wong to finish the job. Tony, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Wong would head back to the Avengers lab in order to study the Skrull and to see if they can find a weakness of any kind. Hank Pym would walk into the room, greeting Tony as well as Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Wong, and he would inquire on if the Skrull has any weaknesses that they can exploit. Tony would say that they've been trying to find any suggestion that could distinguish a Skrull from a human, but they stated that it was impossible, as a Skrull could mimic the human form to an almost perfect degree. Hank would then ask if Doctor Strange had the capabilities of detecting if one was a Skrull. Doctor Strange would say no, as even his magic couldn't get past the sensory ranges if one was a Skrull. Hank would then leave the room and would follow Hank as he would walk into an empty space, in which he would use his intercom to contact what would appear to be the president, but who is actually a Skrull. And Hank would then say that their theory was correct and that the humans have no idea of identifying which is one of their own. The president would say perfect, and that they're one step closer in fulfilling their prophecy. The president would then say to leave the Avengers for now. He has a job for him. We would cut to Nick Fury, Team Cap, and the X-Men planning on what their next move should be. Iceman would suggest that they should take the fight to them, as one of the Skrulls appear to be infiltrating the government. And Falcon would add on to this, seeing as how they should have enough manpower to take on this alien threat. Nick Fury would disagree, as he said that they can't just go barging in without any liable reasons. And an alarm would go off on Nick Fury's watch, in which he would receive a transmission of a ship crash landed in the depths of Wakanda. Nick Fury would then tell everyone that they need to suit up and that they need to keep their guard up in case of attack. Nick Fury and the rest would then pilot the X-Jet to investigate, just in case this might be another form of attack from the Skrulls. We would cut to Hank Pym walking the streets of New York, and he appears to be heading to a destination somewhere until he finally stops at the front entrance of the Baxter building, in which he would discreetly morph into that of Iron Man and fly up, managing to sneak inside of the building to steal some resources that the Skrulls might need in their invasion, before he is none other caught by the Thing, who is confused on why Iron Man is in the Baxter building, before Thing would later realize that Iron Man is trying to steal some of their stuff, and so the Thing would attack Iron Man, leading into a battle in which would catch the attention of the other members of the Fantastic Four, wondering what all the commotion was. And so Iron Man would enable a device which mimics the properties of a mini black hole. Not as powerful, of course, but just enough to suck in everything in sight, in which that device would proceed to pull in the Baxter building from the inside into the tiny device. And Iron Man would depart, getting the resources that he needs, but not before telling the Fantastic Four that he still loves them, and would depart. And the Baxter building would proceed to implode from the inside out, but not before the Fantastic Four manages to escape using Sue's force fields and Johnny's fire to propel themselves away from the device. We would see Iron Man now shifted back into Hank Pym, transmit the leader and would tell him that he has the resources necessary for their invasion, and that he even managed to eliminate one of their biggest threats. The president would congratulate him and state that that's why he's one of their best soldiers, and that he knew he made the right decision in making him into a super Skrull. And so the transmission would go off. We would cut to a mysterious man sitting down in a room. We don't see his face, but we see that he is currently watching the news of the Baxter building and how it just disappeared in thin air. And so we would then later cut to the Skrull Hank Pym going back to Avengers Tower, in which he would encounter Vision. Vision would greet Hank Pym, and Hank Pym would say hello. Hank would then proceed to walk off before Vision would stop him, saying as how it's peculiar the way Hank Pym has been acting recently, and Vision would proceed to question Hank Pym on certain topics, in which Hank Pym would answer the best he could, but Vision would grow more suspicious with each answer. Vision would then reveal that he knows that the real Hank Pym has been missing ever since his departure in Age of Ultron, and that the Hank Pym standing in front of him right now is an imposter, due to certain data files that don't match up well with how the Hank Pym right now is portraying. Hank would realize that he's been caught and would say to hell with it before he morphs into the figure known as the Hulk, in which he would proceed to punch Vision away, leading into an altercation which attracts the attention of Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Wong, who are confused on how Hulk is in the Avengers Tower right now. Iron Man especially, since he knows that Hulk has been missing ever since Age of Ultron and hasn't been able to track him since. Tony would put the pieces together that this must be another one of the Skrulls, and the team would proceed to attack the Hulk imposter. Spider-Man would whip him in the eyes and kick him in the face before Hulk would throw him away. Doctor Strange would try his best to restrain him, but the Hulk's might would be too powerful, and Wong would also assist, but Hulk would kick Wong, sending him flying. And so Vision would also join the mix, in which he would try and grapple Hulk, and which would work momentarily, enough to allow Iron Man to also join the fray, as well as Doctor Strange to restrain him. That is until the Skrull would morph into Thor, and blasting everyone off of him using his lightning, before he would proceed to fly off. Doctor Strange would then reveal that he placed a magic charm on that Skrull, which would allow them to track his location wherever he might be. And so the Avengers would use Doctor Strange's portal to transport them instantly into where the Skrull may be. And so the Skrull Hank Pym, currently in flight, would proceed to call in a ship to diverge to his location, in which the ship would arrive and the Skrull would enter the ship. And a portal would seem to be appearing out of nowhere, and the Avengers would step out and proceed to fight the Super Skrull once more. With the Super Skrull with nowhere left to run, would proceed to take a beating from the Avengers and would ultimately be defeated before morphing back into his original state. Tony would interrogate the Skrull on where the real Hank Pym was. The Skrull would laugh at Tony's face and stating that they stand no chance against the armada on the way, and that Earth will finally be ours. Doctor Strange will then say enough of this and would proceed to read the Skrull's mind, in which it would reveal that a ship has crash landed into Wakanda. Doctor Strange would inform the team of this, and so the team would know where their next destination should be. Spider-Man would ask, "What should we do with Kermit over here?" Before the Skrull would say, "He loves you," before snapping his own neck. The team would be shocked momentarily before Doctor Strange would remind them of the mission. That is until a crash would appear at the side of the spaceship, revealing the Fantastic Four, who see Iron Man and are enraged and would proceed to attack. Iron Man and the team would be confused and would proceed to defend themselves, leaving into Spider-Man fighting the Human Torch, Doctor Strange fighting Invisible Woman, Iron Man fighting Reed Richards, and Vision and Wong fighting the Thing. Iron Man would ask Reed Richards what the hell is he doing, and Reed would say that Iron Man attacked them first. which would lead into a standoff in which Vision has Thing in a headlock, but Reed Richards has Iron Man trapped in his elastic arms. Doctor Strange would then proceed to say that they've all been tricked, and the real person who attacked them was the Skrull laying on the ground right there. The Fantastic Four would recognize immediately what this was, and Iron Man would question them more about it, which Reed would reveal that they had an encounter with beings such as this not too long ago, in which one of them impersonated Sue and attacked himself. Also, how one of them even managed to replicate their exact abilities, and would refer to himself as a super Skrull. Iron Man and Doctor Strange would recount that this Skrull must be the same type, seeing how it managed to replicate Ant-Man's, Iron Man's, Thor, and the Hulk's abilities. Doctor Strange would then proceed to say that they found that another Skrull ship has landed in Wakanda and that they need to go there now. Strange would also add that they could use his magic to get there faster, but that Wakanda has mystical barriers that prevent him from entering using his portal. Reed would hear mystical and magic and would scoff a bit, which would cause Steven to raise an eyebrow. Reed would then say that magic isn't real. Doctor Strange would protest and would state how the Sorcerer Supreme is standing right in front of him, in which Reed would double down on his statement and say that magic is just a word that people use when they don't understand something, which would offend Steven and which would result in a bit of a comical argument between the pair, in which they would discuss the laws of science versus magic, before Steven would say that they don't have time for this and that they need to get to Wakanda now. And the scene would shift into Iron Man, Thing, Spider-Man, Human Torch, and Wong appearing to enjoy the show, with some of them even having refreshments, Iron Man remarking that, "Oh come on, it was just getting good." We would also see Invisible Woman rolling her eyes, seeing as how she's surrounded by idiots. And so the ship would fly off into Wakanda. We would cut to Nick Fury, Team Captain America, as well as the X-Men entering Wakanda in search of the spaceship that crashed. They eventually do find the spaceship, but before they can get any closer, they are confronted by Black Panther and his league of the Dora Milaje, who demands an explanation from the team as to why they are trespassing on Wakandan soil. Captain America will try to explain to Black Panther that they mean no harm and that they've only come to investigate a crash site. Black Panther would tell Captain America that he is aware of this and that is why he himself came to investigate as well. But then all of a sudden, Team Iron Man would come flying from the spaceship and landing on the ground, with some of them not being able to fly, so they are carried by ones who can and placed safely on the ground, which would lead into a three-way confrontation between the different pairs: Team Iron Man, Team Captain America, and the X-Men, as well as Black Panther and the Dora Milaje. Iron Man would tell Cap that he's under arrest, in which Cap in response would say that they have no time for this, Tony, and that the Registration Act, the government, everything was just a ruse played out by the Skrulls. Iron Man would tell Captain America that he's aware of this and that's why he's here, to take a look at the Skrull ship that's crash landed. Wasp would ask Iron Man where Hank was, in which Iron Man would reveal that the Hank that they thought they knew was actually a Skrull the whole time, and that the real Hank has been long gone ever since the Ultron incident, which would shock Janet. Storm would state that since they're all here, why don't they just investigate the spacecraft as a team? Black Panther would look at Storm for more than a second. "I like the way you think." Spider-Man's spider senses would go off, and he would inform the team that something is happening, in which, as if on cue, the ship would then crash open, revealing alternate versions of many heroes, such as a Captain America version, as well as Spider-Man, Wolverine, Iron Man, many others, which would lead into a confrontation in which the heroes are confused and would come to a conclusion that these must be more Skrulls, and which would lead into an ultimate face-off where it's the heroes versus the imposters. We would cut to Rhodey back at Avengers Tower, who is seen walking through a lab and implants a chip in a database, in which we would cut to Tony Stark, whose suit would electrocute and power down, in which Stark would be confused on what the hell is happening to his suit, and we would cut back to Rhodey, whose face morphs into a Skrulls. Rogue would offer to take Iron Man to safety, in which she would fly off away from the battle with Iron Man in tow, and both of them would land in a secluded area. And Iron Man would be confused on what's going on with his suit before he would put the pieces together that someone back at Avengers Tower must be messing with the data frame. And Rogue would then proceed to laugh, which would confuse Iron Man, and he would stare at her with apprehension before Rogue would reveal that Iron Man has been instrumental in helping their cause. In the battlefield, we will cut to Black Widow fighting the Skrulls, in which she will see Rogue and would be confused on how Rogue is still here if she took Iron Man to safety. Rogue would reveal that she never touched Iron Man, which would lead Black Widow into getting more suspicious and would proceed to follow the trail in which Iron Man and Rogue head off to. Rogue would then give an exposition on how Stark has been their most valuable asset and that he is secretly a sleeper Skrull who has been taking the form of Tony Stark for years. Iron Man would deny this, saying that it isn't true, but Rogue would then proceed to push the topic on further, which would result in Iron Man having a bit of a mental crisis. It isn't until Black Widow appears, shooting the imposter Rogue in the shoulder, in which Rogue would manage to get away, leaving Black Widow to tend to Iron Man. Iron Man would tell Black Widow to shoot him as well, as he believes that he actually might be a Skrull. Black Widow will tell him to stop being ridiculous and that Skrull woman was just trying to get in his head. And the battle would proceed to continue amongst the Wakandan jungle, leaving the heroes to be more confused than ever on whether their fighting was actually their guys or the Skrulls. It isn't until Agent Coulson himself would appear, along with his band of other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, in a stray helicarrier, and released a mist that will reveal who is a Skrull and who isn't. This mist would reveal to have been the Terrigen Mist, as revealed in Season 3 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. This gives the heroes the opportunities to identify who is a Skrull, and thus would proceed to beat their counterparts, with Wolverine stabbing a Skrull Spider-Man, and Thing would proceed to pummel a Skrull version of the Hulk, remarking that he wonders if the two will ever have a real battle. And so the Skrulls are defeated, and the heroes are left wondering what next. Until Nick Fury would get an alarm on his scanner and would open it up, telling all the other teams that they might want to see this, and the scanner would reveal a worldwide broadcast revealing influential figures, powerful leaders, and many more, revealing to the world about the oncoming armada of the Skrull Empire, and that these citizens should be grateful, as the Skrulls has seen their world as a new fit for their own destroyed home world, and that they only want what's best for this planet. They don't want to kill any humans, but they will if the humans will try to fight them. The Skrulls impersonating these influential figures would then later state that the Avengers, X-Men, and Fantastic Four, as well as many other superheroes, are to be considered as terrorists, as they seek to destroy the vision of the new Skrull world. The president will be shown as also one of the people who is telling in this broadcast, and he would say that the invasion has already begun, and as if on cue, we would cut to a scene of an army of Skrulls attacking the streets of New York, as well as the country of Latveria, where we would see Dr. Doom destroying Skrull factions by the dozen. The president will then say that even if the humans are misguided, just know that he still loves and cherishes you. We would cut to a massive Skrull ship floating on top of the White House, and Nick Fury and the team would then insinuate that this must be the main ship that is controlling all of the Skrulls' resources. And so the team would know to set off to Washington, D.C., in which they'll have their final confrontation with the Skrulls. The scene would shift into the Skrulls attacking New York, in which we would see Daredevil jumping across the rooftops and defeating as much Skrulls as he can. We would also see the Punisher blasting away any Skrulls that dare cross his path. A group of Skrulls would proceed to swarm Daredevil, who would begin to get overwhelmed. That is, until a car would come flying and crash into the Skrulls. Daredevil would be confused and would turn his head and catch Magneto, of all people, has come to his aid. Magneto would state that he's not doing this to defend humans, but if anyone's going to take over this world, then it'll be mutants, not some green disgusting little creatures. And so Magneto, with several cars swirling around him, would proceed to throw them all at each Skrull faction, in which his Brotherhood would also assist him as well, with Quicksilver zooming past Skrulls and punching them at the same time, and Scarlet Witch using her hex powers to blast the Skrulls away. Sabretooth would see this as an all-you-can-eat buffet and would proceed to hunt down and chase any and all Skrulls. Juggernaut will be bulldozing through the Skrull army, while Toad will be using his tongue to debilitate any Skrulls. Mystique would also join the mix, defeating any Skrulls that crossed her path, as well as Bldg, who the Skrulls would try to blast away, but due to the blubber in Blob's stomach, the blasts do nothing, and Bldg proceeds to pummel the Skrulls down. Rhodey would look down at the carnage below from the Avengers Tower and would proceed to turn his head, if not being stopped by none other than Pepper Potts, who has a gun aimed at Rhodey and demands to know where the real Rhodey is. Rhodey would be acting confused and would say that Pepper is overreacting and tells her to put the gun down. Pepper would know that this Rhodey is a fake due to her receiving word from Tony that someone in the Avengers Tower has hacked into his suit. Pepper would check the security cameras to find Rhodey was the cause. The Skrull Rhodey, with no other alternative, would try and attack Pepper before Pepper would shoot the gun, firing at the Skrull Rhodey's chest, in which he would resort back to his Skrull form, and with his dying words, he would proceed to say that he loves you. We would cut to a scene of the same mysterious man from before, who is still sitting in that room and is looking at the TV broadcast, and would thus tell one of his men to get the jet ready, as he will be making a trip to Washington, D.C. The scene would shift into the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Agent Coulson and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., as well as Nick Fury, arriving at Washington, D.C., in which they are confronted by another Skrull army, in which the final battle would proceed to ensue, in which the president would unleash his army of super Skrulls that would proceed to attack the heroes. The heroes will start to get overwhelmed a bit and will try and fight back against the Skrull army as well as the legion of super Skrulls, but it would appear that the super Skrulls' powers are too maladaptive and that the heroes are slowly getting weaker by the dozen. That is until Nick Fury would sense a ship that is rapidly approaching the atmosphere, and in that ship would appear Thor, as well as the remaining Asgardians such as Loki, Heimdall, as well as Beta Ray Bill, and Fenrir. Even the Enchantress and Scourge are seen in the mix. Captain America would smile, as well as Tony. Thor would drop down from the sky, accompanied by Loki and Beta Ray Bill, in the same fashion as he did in Infinity War, in which he would tell the Skrulls that they've made a mistake in attacking Midgard, and now they'll face the wrath of Asgard. This would lead into a final standoff between the heroes and the rest of the Skrulls, in which the Skrull Rogue would appear in the front and offer the heroes one last chance into submitting for their cause, and that for as long as they try to fight, just know that he still loves you. Spider-Man would question who is he, and the Rogue Skrull would reply, God. Nick Fury would say enough of this, and would also comment that there's been enough weirdos trying to conquer their planet, and quite frankly, he's getting sick of it. Some eyes would shift to Loki, who would give sort of an awkward smile. The heroes would put on their battle stances, in which the Skrulls would as well, and before they would clash, Captain America would give the signal, Avengers, assemble, which would ignite a fury, and the heroes would dash towards the Skrull army, and the Skrulls would proceed doing the same, leading into the clash that would be known as the Battle for Earth, in which Spider-Man and Human Torch would team up to take down as much Skrulls as they can, cracking a couple of jokes with each other on the way, and Strange and Reed Richards combining their knowledge of magic and science to take down as much Skrulls as they can. Iron Man and Wolverine will also team up, and Iron Man would use his repulsor blast to blast Wolverine's claws as a way of reflecting them and blasting as many Skrulls as they can, with Wolverine saying, "Not bad, shellhead." Black Widow would sneak into the White House and stumble onto a room in which would reveal all of those who were captured and impersonated by the Skrulls. Black Widow would find Hank Pym, as well as Rhodey and many others, in which Black Widow would proceed to free them, and they would escape and find their way to the battlefield, where Hank would see Janet and embrace her, apologizing for everything, for the Ultron incident and for basically neglecting her. Janet would also apologize, as she had no idea that Hank was locked away for all this time, and so the two would reconcile, as well as Tony and Rhodey. And Iron Man would ask Rhodey how he's feeling and when did the Skrull replace him. And Rhodey would state that after the events of Iron Man 3, a Skrull kidnapped him and has taken his form ever since. Tony would be enraged, as that was so long ago, and the fact that his best friend was kept in a cell for so long makes him angry and would proceed to decimate as many Skrulls as he can, while also sending Rhodey a suit as well, so Rhodey can also join the fight. The battle would be continuing until all of a sudden, Captain Marvel would enter the atmosphere and join the heroes in their battle against the Skrulls. The Skrulls would recognize immediately who this was, and some would even start to flee as they remember what Captain Marvel did to them 20 years ago. And Captain Marvel would proceed to battle and decimate as many Skrull ships as she could, stopping the Armada. The President sees the heroes winning and would be prepared to flee, but not until being shot in the chest by Nick Fury, who walks up to the Skrull, and the Skrull would revert back into his regular state. Nick Fury would then shoot him in the face, remarking that he never really liked the guy in the first place. And so, with most of the Skrull army defeated, the heroes would stand face to face against the Skrull version of Rogue, who would reveal that she is the leader of the army and that the heroes are fools for not submitting to the prophecy. The heroes, with Wolverine leading the charge, would attempt to attack the Skrull, but the Skrull is then shot in the head, and which everyone would turn and trying to find who was the one who shot the bullet, and the camera would slowly pan up to a man in the suit before it would slowly reveal his face. Spider-Man would be shot and would look like that he's seen a ghost. The figure would appear to be Norman Osborn. The news broadcast would be documenting all of this, which meant that the whole world would see the fight that the heroes would be having with the Skrulls and would see the result of Norman Osborn basically shooting the last Skrull leader. We would cut to Harry Osborn watching the news, who's just as in a much shock as Peter. Norman Osborn would then proceed to tell his men to clean up the rest, in which the rest of Norman Osborn's faction would proceed to kill the remaining Skrulls. And so the screen would shift into a couple days later, where it is shown that the government is now repealing the Registration Act, after it has been revealed that that was just a rouge planted by the Skrulls, as well as many of the heroes offering to clean up after the Skrulls' attack on New York. Mr. Fantastic, Iron Man, and Doctor Strange will manage to restore the Baxter building, with Iron Man remarking, "Maybe the three of us should have our own team." Doctor Strange would remark, "Not in a million years." Reed would agree with Strange. Nick Fury would documentary on how there will always be heroes out there when you need them. We see Spider-Man and Daredevil swinging through New York, as well as the X-Men training in the Danger Room. We would also see the Fantastic Four hanging out in the Baxter building, as well as the Avengers, who are seen reconciling after the events of Civil War, with Tony and Steve especially apologizing to one another. Thor would be confused and would say, "Wait, there was a war and no one told me?" The team would laugh, leaving the Avengers on a pretty happy note. We would cut to the new president, holding an award ceremony nominating Norman Osborn as the war hero who stopped the Skrull invasion. The president would offer Norman to give a speech, in which he does, and Norman would say that he couldn't have done it without the brave men and women who fought alongside him. But Norman would admit that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been compromised and that he will offer a new organization that will not repeat the same mistakes as those before it. One of the people in the press would say how Norman was thought to be dead for 5 years now, so how is it possible that he's still alive? Norman would give a story on how he was kidnapped by a terrorist organization and tortured for those 5 years, but managed to escape using his wits and managed to stumble onto Washington, D.C. after witnessing the news of the former president giving a speech on how the Skrulls' duty is to invade Earth. Norman couldn't just sit there and watch his planet be destroyed, so he traveled to Washington, D.C. along with his forces that he paid for using the money that he had left, and thus would give him the opportunity to end the violence and defeat the Skrulls once and for all. The crowd would of course cheer and chant Norman as their hero, and Norman would then reveal that he has plans for a new initiative, one that will be greater than the likes of the Avengers, an initiative that Norman promises will defend Earth until its last breath. Norman Osborn would then reveal the members of this new initiative, in which the likes of Bldg, Sentry, Abomination, Radioactive Man, Moonstone, the Leader, and the Winter Soldier. Norman would say that this team's sole purpose is to defend Earth, and that this team, along with himself, will try to accomplish that task to the best of their ability. Norman would also comment that what's even better is this team is American. So, yeah, that was a big video, probably the longest video I've ever made. So thank you so much for watching that long, and if you enjoyed this video, please like it. Really helps a lot, and rest assured I have big plans for Phase 4 and beyond, as well as many other projects that I'm interested in as well, such as a DC cinematic universe or a 2000s universe with the 2000s Marvel characters like Tobey's Spider-Man or Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. So yeah, look out for those videos, and I'll see you guys later.